But it's not only animals that are affected by climate change.
So the species will eventually reach the top of the mountain.
So are all species expected to go extinct?
The corals lose their vibrant colors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rainbow Climate Change Podcast. If you're new here, please check out our last three episodes to get yourself updated about what we talk about. Today, we're going to talk about the effects of climate change and ecosystems. I'm Malikia, and I'm here with my fellow host.
Philip.
Well, before we dive into the effects of climate change on ecosystems, I feel it's important to first understand what ecosystems are exactly.
So what is an ecosystem, Malikia?
An ecosystem is a community of organisms and their physical environment interacting together. Climate change impacts ecosystems in various ways.
And what are some of the ways that climate change impacts ecosystems?
Well, due to warmer temperatures, the water warms up in the sea, and this leads to sea level rise. We spoke about sea level rise in our last episode, so feel free to check that out. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. Due to the sea level rise, salt water may invade a freshwater system, causing a species of fish to die, and this removes an animal from the food chain, meaning the animal which would normally feed on that species of fish may struggle to find something to eat and thus struggle to live. But it's not only animals that are affected by climate change, plants are also affected.
Yes, some plants can only grow in certain temperature conditions. So when it's too hot or too cold, then they might not be able to grow and therefore die.
Additionally, natural disasters are also influenced by climate change and they affect animals and plants. Wildfires, for example, can lead to deaths of entire ecosystems. Also, strong hurricanes can blow away animals and destroy entire ecosystems. Also, climate change threatens biological diversity across the planet, partly because temperature is one of the environmental conditions that defines the geographic range of appropriate habitats for each species. And the rate of warming resulting from human driven climate change is faster than many plants and animals can adapt. For some species, migrating to polar regions may be the best chance for survival. In the tropics and temperate forests, this is clearly seen. However, there is a higher rate of migration in the tropics. Freeman Benjamin's research showed that birds in the tropics were seen to be going all in on the strategy of migrating upslope, and that other animals were beginning to do the same. But this raised concern. Philip, do you know perhaps why this raised concern?
Um, is it maybe because mountains are not like infinitely tall, so the species will eventually reach the top of the mountain?
Yes. And because of this, species are simply on their way to extinction by going upslope, Freeman said. They're on an escalator to extinction. Simply because as temperatures rise, they will keep climbing higher and higher until they reach the top of the mountain and can't climb any higher. But not all species can successfully make these migrations. Prior research by KZoo, a national renewable energy laboratory, where young trees did not seem to be establishing themselves in cooler habitats farther north. The new paper showed that in mountain regions, temperate forests are faring slightly better at making smaller upslope migrations. But these shifts are not enough to counter the effect of high temperatures on the trees. Other effects of climate change are that climate change affects some of the critical services the ecosystems provide to society. For example, ecosystems provide a lot of food to people. However, due to climate change, the drought and heat, it affects the availability of some crops and farmers' abilities to grow certain crops.
Oh, that's interesting. Are there any other effects of climate change on ecosystems?
Yes, forest ecosystems play many roles in the environment. One of the roles they play is the carbon cycle. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in the roots, soil, and forest floor. But because of an increase in wildfires, droughts, and pests due to climate change, forest ecosystems are not able to effectively absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Going back to something that you said earlier, climate change decreases Africa's biodiversity. Biodiversity is just a way of talking about how many different kinds of plants, animals, and other living things you can find in an area.
Why exactly does climate change lead to us having fewer kinds of living things?
It mainly comes down to the change part of climate change. When things in a plant or an animal species environment change, the species tries to change with it or adapt. One way you can think of adaptation, for example, is how when some people feel cold, they might wear a sweater and then take it off when it's too hot. However, for plants and animals, just like you said, Malikia, adaptation is not as simple as putting on and taking off a jumper. It takes time. While some are able to adapt, weather patterns and temperatures are changing too quickly for many species to do so. Bear in mind that many plants and animals are also dealing with losing their habitats as a result of climate change and human activities like deforestation. So this just makes it even harder for species to cope. This is extremely serious because it could lead to some plants and animals going extinct.
Wow. Are there any animals that are particularly affected?
The main land animal in our region that is affected is the African elephant, while dolphins, whales, sea turtles, and dugongs, which are also known as sea cows, are struggling in the ocean. But we'll come back to the effects on ocean creatures later.
So are all species expected to go extinct?
No, thankfully. Some might even go the opposite route and increase in number, but that is not always a good thing.
How come?
Invasive and nuisance species. An invasive species is a plant or an animal that you won't usually find in a particular area, but it causes a lot of damage to that place. The term nuisance species is more broad and covers both invasive species and species that are usually found in one area but also cause harm. When weather patterns change, nuisance species can move to new places. This is not necessarily the case for all nuisance species, though, for example, fewer areas are expected to have a suitable climate for the weed Lantana camarum, which is usually found in South America but has found a home here in East Africa, to grow, so it is likely to appear in fewer places. However, the opposite is expected for the tree/shrub Neltuma juliflora. This plant is originally from the Americas too, and not only is it a weed, but it also increases malaria transmission because it acts as a sort of sugar refueling station for mosquitoes.
What about invasive species in water?
Water hyacinth is a particularly problematic one. It's this green plant that you might see resting near the shores of Lake Victoria. As temperatures increase and the lake becomes warmer, hyacinth may spread even more across the lake.
Invasive species have an effect to the natural environment, but they also affect us as well.
Take the coffee berry borer, also known as the Hypothalamus hampei. This is a beetle which can be found in coffee producing countries worldwide, like Uganda and Kenya. Coffee comes from trees and shrubs that produce these cherry like fruits called coffee berries. What you find in a shop are coffee beans, which are the seeds of these fruits. The coffee berry borer has a strong jaw that enables it to essentially bite into the coffee berry, enter it, and eat it from the inside. This causes the coffee berry to become light and low quality. And this means that farmers have less coffee to sell at high prices, so they make less money. Climate change increases the areas suitable for the coffee berry borer, especially in Uganda and around Mount Kenya. This is a huge problem because coffee is one of the main exports of Uganda and Kenya. Or, in other words, Uganda and Kenya sell their coffee to other countries and make quite a bit of their money from it.
This is something we should all be concerned about then, since it doesn't just affect people who drink coffee, but everyone in our economy. You said you'd come back to the impact on ocean animals later. So how about we do so now?
Of course, with increasing levels of carbon dioxide, our oceans absorb the CO2 and form carbonic acid. This makes our oceans more acidic. Corals, oysters, and mussels are especially vulnerable because the processes they use to build their shells are disrupted when the ocean becomes more acidic. On top of that, oceans are becoming warmer due to higher temperatures and experiencing warmer, longer ocean heat waves. These impacts are particularly harmful to our coral reefs.
And what exactly are coral reefs?
Coral reefs are colorful underwater ecosystems made up of animals called corals. These build up the reefs by constantly building up their own shells, and they form in warm, shallow water near the equator. Even though the Great Barrier Reef in Australia is one of the most famous coral reefs in the world, we have coral reefs on our East African coastlines as well.
And how do they get their color?
Coral reefs have very colorful algae called zooxanthellae. These algae use the coral's waste products to photosynthesize, which basically means they use light from the sun and these waste products to make food. Then that food is provided back to corals, which then form waste products that the algae can use again. And this forms a nice cycle that benefits both the coral and the algae. However, at higher temperatures, the corals eject the algae in order to adapt. And because they get rid of the algae, the corals lose their vibrant colors and become white. This is called bleaching, and over 90% of East African coral reefs are expected to be bleached at 2 degrees Celsius of global warming.
Coral reefs aren't just pretty, and good for tourism. They also protect our coastlines from storms, strong waves, and floods by forming a natural underwater barrier.
Another natural line of defense we might lose are mangroves. Mangroves are trees that live on tropical coastlines, protecting them from storms and corrosion, while also providing a home for birds and other living things. Mangroves are vulnerable to sea level rise, flooding, and extreme weather, which are effects of climate change. See our previous episodes to learn more. At 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, mangroves will be exposed to risks from these effects, which will be amplified at 2 degrees Celsius and 3 degrees Celsius. As usual, we're going to have a short quiz where we'll ask you a few questions that you can use to test how much you remember from today's episode. We'll say each question twice, and feel free to pause, think about the answer, and play when you're ready to move on.
What is an ecosystem? What is an ecosystem? Then, what are some of the roles that forest ecosystems play on the environment? What are some of the roles that forest ecosystems play on the environment?
The third question is, what is a nuisance species? And can you give 3 examples? What is a nuisance species? And can you give 3 examples? Our last question for today, how do coral reefs gain and lose their color? How do coral reefs gain and lose their color?
Thank you for listening to our podcast. I hope that you've learned a lot from it.
As always, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the things. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us by email, in the comments, or wherever else you might find us.
So, bye-bye.
Bye. The blooper reel.
Our ecosystem. Oh,
There's no a wild species here. Cats.
right you are.
What's that wind? I don't know. Like, can you hear it? Like on the thing? Let me check. As a result of. Oh, hi, Misha. Okay. Everyone, say hi to Misha.
Oh, it's a podcast.
Yeah, it's the podcast. Yeah.
You're recording.
Yeah, Misha, say hi.
Hello.
Everyone, say hi to Misha. She's a very cool person.
Yes.